here we go. I'm on YouTube. Guess it's time to introduce myself. I'm Evgeny. I'm a game designer. I've been doing these pretty long trips by train to work every day recently. While I was doing that, I started wondering about this Battlefront 3 idea, and I was thinking about it for a couple weeks, and then I started writing a script, and it kind of escalated into where we are right now. So let's talk about it. Let's start with covering a little bit of my story with Battlefront. Actually, my parents had a pretty strong opinion that if I would ever touch a video game in my life, that I would just spiral into video game addiction and never see the sun and never touch the grass again. Basically, what I did is I just became a game developer instead. And I'm like, okay, parents, you don't want me to play video games. I found a loophole. I'm gonna make video games. So now I'm getting paid for what my parents didn't let me do. Battlefront. Yes, so basically the first game that my parents have allowed me to play was Battlefront 2015. I still remember it was an incredibly long hustle to make the game run on our PC back then. My dad ended up spending like an entire day, I think, searching on forums on how to initially, I think, update drivers, which sounds very trivial right now, but back then it was a big problem. Eventually, I could play it. It was working, and then I spent like 2,000 hours on it or something. So when Battlefront 2 released, I immediately bought it. I love both of these games, and since now I'm a full-time professional game developer, I just couldn't help myself but wonder, what would Battlefront 3 need to be if somebody was making it today? How do you elevate the ideas of Battlefront 2? How do you neutralize the problems with the game? I think to start trying to figure out what would make Battlefront 3 a great game, we need to first understand what makes a good video game in general. And that's a pretty complex question, but I'll kind of summarize my views on it. There are plenty of different attempts on making like a formal framework for good game design. There are plenty of different books. For example, the most conventional and well-known game design theory is the theory of flow, which speaks about nothing but basically how to make your gameplay as engaging as possible. And I've seen people say that the state of flow is the definition of fun in video games, and I just don't agree with that. It is important. It is definitely a fundamental pillar of game design. Your game needs to be engaging on a very low mechanical level. But if you focus on only that and don't have anything on top of that, this just leaves you with a time killer, shallow video game that will be engaging, but will leave you with nothing. And I think the good games are the games that create real emotions and memories and some special experience that you can basically live through via this video game. Think about the Outer Wilds, think about Cyberpunk 2077. These are the games that leave you with memories. You think of the adventures you had with these games, you remember some of the special moments you had with them, they stick with you. And I think it is due to the unique feelings and emotions that they managed to create via their experience. And I think Battlefront 2 is one of these games. And I guess now we just need to figure out which exactly experience does Battlefront 2 offer. Of course, the most obvious first part of it is Star Wars itself. Star Wars is one of these imaginary worlds that is just so detailed with lore surrounding every aspect of it that at some point when you're trying to like get immersed into all of that universe stuff, it stops feeling like a made-up story and you'll start believing that it's all a real existing stuff from like a parallel universe to ours. I think that's really the feeling that it gives often to many of the Star Wars fans, that it's a real world that is just existing on like a separate plane of reality and that we can peek at but that we cannot engage with. And I think it's natural that you really want to reach to the other side and engage with this other dimension. And Battlefront 2 allows us to do this. For this, it needs to be really immersive. So let's analyze how does Battlefront 2 achieve this unprecedented level of immersion. The first part of it that we can separate is how Battlefront 2 contextualizes gameplay. What it does is it paints you with the fantasy of this game right now not being just like a multiplayer match with no outside meaning, but actually being like a smaller battle in a larger galactic battle. They do it with amazing animated environmental work with like the huge starships hovering over the battlefield, with blaster fire going all around you, with some random ships flying over the battlefield, and also like outside the combat zone you see characters just like you fighting each other. So you can really buy this, that this is a part of a larger struggle or of a larger war effort, and it really helps you immerse into this fantasy of really being there. Another amazing trick that they do is providing a little bit of context to what is your mission and why are you doing this at the beginning of the match, when you have like a narrator basically say that
intelligence reports a sizable cache of Republic medical supplies hidden in a village below. We are to secure and destroy those supplies and take out the clone capital ship. The Volusians should be out of the way by now.
And it's a small voice line in the beginning of a match, but it is extremely powerful in how it creates this illusion and immersion and really adds to the whole experience. Another part that really sells that it is a real struggle that you're participating in is the fact that you fight side by side with other players. One of the most epic moments is when you see a friend or a random stranger rush to the objective and then sacrifice themselves in a desperate attempt to capture Command Post A. This is 10 times more emotional and powerful than seeing like a character in a story video game do some heroic shit, because even if you're immersed in the story video game, like on the background of your mind there is still an understanding that this is a fantasy and this was just like a made-up character who somebody animated. When you see a real player jump in front of the objective, covering with their body the objectives that everybody else is shooting at, this is some real shit. I'm just saying, you look at it and you see heroism that Star Wars is famous for. And what helps selling this immersion as well is, of course, the fact that you can play as many of the iconic characters and heroes and reinforcements, and really sink into the roleplay aspect of the game and finally feel like you're a Jedi or a clone trooper or a stormtrooper. If you're a fascist, that's fine too, I guess, in a video game, quote unquote. And I think this is also, while being a pretty iconic part of Battlefront experience, one of the biggest problems with the game. I think that the problem with Battlefront 2 is that it's spreading its own development budget and it's spreading itself too thin over too many different handcrafted experiences. I think how it went back when they were basically planning this game out, I think it was something like EA executive comes into the room to DICE and they talk about, well, Star Wars fan base being huge. Everybody in the Star Wars fan base has their own favorite Star Wars fantasy or Star Wars era or Star Wars character. Somebody always dreamt of being a pilot and piloting an X-Wing. Somebody always wanted to feel like they're a Darth Vader. Somebody is a fan of Clone Wars and always wanted to kill some clankers, not to sound racist. Yeah. And I think what they decided on was to try to make a game for all of these people simultaneously and to fulfill every single Star Wars fantasy in the world there is under a single title. You ever wanted to drunk drive one of these bad boys? Well, Star Wars Battlefront 2. You ever wanted to duel Darth Maul as Obi-Wan and not kill him again? You can do it in our game, Battlefront 2. You ever wanted to fly a spaceship? Yeah, you can do it here. Ever wanted to be an Ewok and hunt for stormtroopers to then eat them and make musical instruments out of their helmets? For some reason, also Battlefront 2. My point being, Star Wars is immensely huge. It is probably one of the biggest universes humanity has ever came up with. There are lots of different eras, lots of different characters, lots of different fractions. And each of these have their own little cluster fan base. It is simply incredibly hard to try to shove all of that into one video game. You might argue that they nailed it, and I'm gonna prove you wrong. Look at unequal polish and quality of the content across the board. So you can look at Galactic Assault game mode and compare Galactic Assault on Tatooine, for example, to Galactic Assault on Geonosis. Remember Geonosis? Game starts with you hacking into the AT-TEs, then somebody is taking control over like an entirely new type of vehicle that was created just for this one game mode. Then you're trying to advance with this tank at the firing distance, then you shoot with it at like a special type of, I guess it's an airship from the Separatists or like a fuel tank or something. Then your entire team shoots at it, then there is a storm, the sandstorm that is coming and covering basically half of the map with sandstorm. And then you're advancing the tanks forward, and it's so cinematic and so polished and with so many unique elements of content created for just this thing. And then compare it to Tatooine, where at first you have to take an objective, then you have to take an objective, and then you have to take another objective, and then you do it like 5 or so times, and then you either get stopped or you win, and that's it. It is just way more basic and less interesting compared to the Geonosian battle. So you see what I'm getting at. The sheer amount of content that they had to make due to this design direction of trying to fulfill every single Star Wars fantasy led to lots of it being, well, underdeveloped, I would say. And why do you think is that? I think it's exactly because they had so much stuff on their plate that they just couldn't chew all of it, and just couldn't find enough time, money, and resources to spend on all of it equally. Like, let's be honest, how many times have you played as a starfighter in a Galactic Assault mode? How many times have you picked that thing? It's not fun. It's its own layer of gameplay that has minimal interaction with the battle on the ground. It has minimal effects on the battle on the ground. It ends up being its own little minigame that you're playing while the rest of the people in your team are trying to fight for their objective. So yeah, so there are many of these things that really has been only added because somebody in the community of Star Wars has a fantasy of flying an X-Wing, and therefore they needed to be added. And I think this design direction of trying to identify any Star Wars fantasies existing and trying to recreate all of them under one game is a major reason why Battlefront 3 was initially cancelled when DICE came to EA with their original proposal for new ideas for the next game. Because Battlefront 2 already covered so much different stuff than to make a third game that would stand out and be a noticeable evolution from Battlefront 2. Following the same design philosophy would mean covering even broader spectrum of different fantasies and different Star Wars activities, which at this point is just completely unreasonable and insane. So does that mean that it's over? Battlefront 3 conceptually is impossible to make? That is not true. And that is exactly the reason why I wanted to make this video, because I came up with some solutions. It might sound as controversial for some of the Star Wars fans, but I think nowadays, to make a very successful Star Wars game, the game designers would need to prioritize players that are not a part of Star Wars community, rather than trying to get interested as many Star Wars fans as possible. Sounds counterintuitive. Naturally, when you own a franchise and when you make a game within that franchise, you think, oh well, we're gonna make this game for all of our fans and get as many of these fans on board. Problem is, there are just way too many different types of fans. Some of them are prequel fans, some of them are sequel fans, some of them only want original trilogy content. My point is, within each of these little factions within the community, there are less people than there are people interested in a specific type of video games or a specific game genre. So if you're going to focus on a fraction of the Star Wars community, but then make a really good video game for a specific type of audience that is unrelated to Star Wars, they will not care if it's Star Wars. They will still play it. And that is the way further both for the video games in Star Wars setting and frankly any Star Wars content. When you stop trying to make fan service and you focus on making something that is standalone good, even if it wasn't Star Wars, then you will still attract people to it just by making a really good project. It is scary. Most of big executives and business people prefer to go safer routes and just completely over rely on fan service over trying to make a good game, especially because they have nothing to do with actual development of the game, so they don't understand what makes a good video game. Then yeah, it seems risky to bet on making a good video game. They understand fan service much better. It's a simpler idea, so that's kind of why we as a species kind of ended up in this cage of shitty fan service media all across the board. But that's not a way to go. There needs to be a shift in the design philosophy, which needs to prioritize one core experience over trying to be a game for everyone. And, well, which experience should it be then? Well, let's see what experience is the core experience of Battlefront 2. And I think it's safe to say that this experience is the immersive, cinematic, large-scale, ground-based combat scenarios. Capital Supremacy, Galactic Assault, these are the experiences that really scream, I'm Battlefront. That is the core. Everything else is just extra stuff. Starfighters, extra stuff. Heroes versus villains, extra stuff. Team deathmatch, definitely extra stuff. The next thing is gonna hurt. Single player campaign is also extra stuff. Yes, I know. I also want a good first-person shooter, story-based, cinematic, single-player experience. I would really love a new Republic Commando game. I would be a huge fan of it. But the fact is, in game design, you shouldn't try making different games within one game. Because whenever you're trying to, well, duct tape different games into your game, you first of all risking that different experiences will actually take away from other experiences in the same game, and also you're just trying to overload yourself, and it's never good for the game. It is better to make multiple smaller games that are hyper focused on the core experience and the core premise, rather than try to put all of these experiences into one game. I know, it's a pretty controversial take. You know what I'm gonna do now? I'm gonna make it even more controversial. What you should do if you're making Battlefront 3 is you should make only one Star Wars era. Select the one that you like most, or select the one that you think will give you the most amount of gameplay opportunities, and just do this one. Make it good. Make it as polished as possible. Add enough content there. But don't spread yourself across multiple eras that do not interact with each other. Magic of game design comes from the moment when you create content and then you add that content on top of the existing content, and that new content interacts with the old content in a new way, and then this sheer amount of new interactions with different aspects of the game create the value and create the new experience. When you're creating a different era, it's a different game within the same game. The characters from the new era do not interact with the characters in other eras. You cannot fight with Republic Commando against a Death Trooper from the original trilogy. And the outcome of that is that you have two separate games, or in this case, three separate games that don't really interact, and it's not good. Good thing though is that you can still add those eras later on as seasonal updates or something like that. Just don't do it on release, please. On release, you should focus on one era, one main game mode. Focus on developing the gameplay so it is amazing. Okay, so we're finally getting to gameplay. So now let's talk about gameplay design. And I think I want to start with discussing the gameplay flaws of Battlefront 2. So like the most exciting moments of Battlefront 2 are these moments when you have an objective and then your entire team is focused around this one area and is working together trying to push. These moments of unity, cooperation, heroic sacrifice for the victory are the moments when Battlefront 2 really shines as this experience of being on the battlefield. Thing is, when you don't have that unity and you don't have that cooperation and your team is completely disorganized, it leads to these moments becoming the most frustrating losses in gaming history. Imagine a scenario. You're really working for the victory. You're doing a lot of effort, and it's still not enough because your entire team is doing random crap instead of working together. Some dudes are running on the edge of the map, some people are trying to desperately push objective where there are two heroes protecting it. There are lots of these moments when you understand as a good player what needs to be done, but you have absolutely no way of communicating it and actually cooperating with your team. And you understand what needs to be done. You understand that objective D has been unprotected for last 10 minutes. There is nobody there, but you just can't get there because every time you spawn and try to go there, you go there alone, the rest of your team is somewhere else, and then somebody spawns on you and you still get killed. It brings incredible frustration and feeling of helplessness. It is the opposite of what a Battlefront experience should be. It should be about fighting shoulder by shoulder with your brothers, like these moments, well, we're clones, we fight, we win. Like, that is Battlefront. We're clones, we run in different directions, and lose is not the motto. It's just not. It's okay to have losses. It's okay to have an opponent team which is better than you are. But whenever you're losing, not because your opponents are just way better than you are, but just because your team is so disorganized, it is painful. The main reason, however, why these situations occur is because there is no way to actually coordinate your actions. In Galactic Supremacy, they added this feature that you can ping the objective that you want to highlight, but I don't think anybody uses it because I think, well, you're not forced to, and most of the players don't really play that strategically or don't really care that much. So while a good idea, it doesn't work. I think also why they added the system initially was because they were also noticing that specifically in the Supremacy, the lack of communication becomes a real problem. And this problem is not as noticeable in Galactic Assault, in the original big game mode, because frankly, Galactic Assault never has more than a couple of objectives that you have to complete simultaneously. The problem with this approach, however, is that you end up with a very narrow and linear structure of both the map and gameplay. And also what it does is that it leaves certain big areas of the map underutilized, as basically all the gunfights are always centered around the objectives that you need to either protect or take. And also it just becomes much more repetitive. And I think also we can kind of see where the team was heading towards with the later added Supremacy mode, with a more open structure, with a more freedom of combat possibilities of where on the map to go, which objective to take. And I think since it is being still the most popular game mode, we can see that it is indeed the right direction to go. It's just that these communication issues and cooperation issues needs to be addressed. Alright, so I think it's enough talking about the design of Battlefront 2. It's time to move to the design of Battlefront 3. So the main unique part about Star Wars Battlefront 2, it is about this experience of being on a battlefield in a huge galactic war that is going out there. So as it is the most important part to sell this fantasy and the immersion of really being out there, I think it's a good idea to take inspiration from Helldivers 2 again in the way they handle this community-driven battle war scenarios. What I'm saying is basically there could be a war map with planets and with different star systems that are currently being under the control of a certain faction, depending on which era you're choosing. For convenience sake, I'm gonna just assume you chose Star Wars Clone Wars, because that is the era that I personally mostly care about. So don't mind me, I'm the one making the video. Let's imagine you have the war map between Separatists and Republic, and you can see on the war map which systems are currently being contested, which systems are currently being taken by the Separatists or the Republic. And then basically just like in Helldivers, you would be able to join the matches across these planets that are currently being contested, and every match would contribute to the side that you're representing. So in Helldivers, you can't really fight for anyone other than humans. But in Star Wars game, in Star Wars Battlefront, of course, you would have to be able to pick a side. Of course, a player that chose a faction shouldn't be restricted to only fighting for this one faction, and it should be possible to switch factions. I think this kind of common community effort and community-driven war effort would be a really immersive step towards selling the fantasy of really participating in this bigger war struggle rather than just playing a match after a match. So now, when we discussed the separate idea, let's talk more in depth about the structure of the game and how the gameplay of the main battle mode would have to change. And I think it's fair to start with a suggestion that an AI and player versus enemy combat should be made a much more dominant part of gameplay. I think it is also visible from looking at Capital Supremacy that the DICE team also realized that adding extra bots really adds to the experience of participating in this large-scale battle, because you don't want to really populate the server and the map with more players, because it's just going to bring more technical and game design challenges as well, and going to be even harder for an individual to actually contribute to anything. So you don't want to have that. You still want to have the population of real players on a map at like a perfectly balanced level, but you want to have much more action at all times. You don't want to have empty parts where you just run around without anything, and you want to basically amplify the action as much as possible. And AI bots are perfect for that. To differentiate players from bots, I think it's pretty smart to just make all the playable characters like a veteran type. So the basic mobs, you would basically have all being controlled by AI, and then make the playable characters veterans with cooler cosmetic, with no basic skins pretty much. So like even like the most basic skin still visually is more interesting and detailed than like the basic mob. And that would also explain all of these interesting abilities that are available to player, all the different weapons. If it's like a veteran clone in like a veteran clone squad, it makes much more sense. And another huge benefit of introducing more PvE elements to the game is that it allows you to introduce more reinforcement units being present at the same time and more characters being present at the same time. So normally in a normal Battlefront 2 game, you would still have to limit the number of available reinforcements to like maybe being 1/3 of the team, because it would just feel weird and inconsistent with the lore when you have like every other player running as a Republic Commando. But if you have as many bots as you have players, or even much more bots than you have players running around, then it is completely fine to have most of the team playing as a reinforcement or a character without actually compromising the fantasy that much. And then this, in its own way, introduces another opportunity. Since you now can have more people playing with reinforcements at the same time, you can introduce more types of reinforcement in between the normal reinforcement and like a legendary hero character. For example, you could have a character type which is a Jedi and a Force user, but doesn't have like a legendary name and is more of like a no-name kind of Jedi character, because you know in the Jedi Order there were so many Jedis. You can always introduce some new Jedi and it would still be fine. So you could have like this reinforcement character that would be just a nameless Jedi Knight, which is, in terms of gameplay, plays more like a hero, but just slightly weaker than like a legendary hero with a name like a Obi-Wan or Anakin or something like that, but still allows people to play as a Jedi and have more of them being present at the battlefield at the same time. And another crazy idea that might be very interesting, might be slightly out of scope, but I think it is still at least worth to thinking about, is the idea of actually giving players control over friendly AI. What I mean by that is that maybe you get spawned with a couple of AI units that are assigned to you as your support units, and then they automatically target the same targets that you're targeting. They're following you around on the map, and they're basically acting as
your troops that you're commanding. And maybe if you really want to get crazy, it might be like as a special ability for an officer class, for example, you can actually give certain commands to the AI units. I'm kind of thinking about how you could give commands to the Republic Commando clones in, well, Republic Commando game. It wasn't really complicated, but even this slight level of giving commands to AI unit really did bring up this entire fantasy of being in charge of like a squad in a Star Wars battle, and I think something like that would really also add to the entire experience. Okay, I think the next issue that we need to tackle is the problem with coordination with your team members. I think the solution for this problem comes from completely reworking the spawn system. Let's say you start the same way you start a normal Battlefront 2 match, spawning at a default spawn point, instantly running towards the enemy lines, getting into action, just engaging with the fight, making a couple kills. You still make battle points basically the same exact way you did in Battlefront 2. Then you die, but you have earned a couple of battle points to spend, and now you can select a special reinforcement character. And now is when the system becomes different from what was in Battlefront 2. Now when you select a character or a reinforcement, there is a button that appears that basically says assemble an assault team. And you can ignore this button and spawn normally on your own if you really don't want to play in a team and just run around and blast things. It's fine. But if you press the assemble the assault squad, then you become a squad leader. And then basically all the players in the match, even the active ones who are actively playing in the game right now and not just waiting for a respawn, they get like a little pop-up menu on like the left corner of the screen or something, which basically lists all the attack patties that are being assembled at the current moment. And you can click on any of these and join this attack squad. And as a team leader who is assembling the assault party, you have the ability to choose the objective for the entire squad. So instead of spawning into this big map and having the complete freedom to run around and go anywhere else, you just have this one objective that is active for your squad at this given moment. And then basically as a squad leader, you would be able to select a point on the map where you want to be dropped off. And now your entire attack party, which can be of a different size depending on which character you chose and how many people joined your party. Basically, all of you spawn in a, well, let's say Republic or droid gunship that then flies in a cutscene to the location that you have selected as a team leader and disembarks you there. And that's where you spawn as a squad. And now you have just one mission to take one specific objective on this map. It is important to note that you shouldn't be allowed to spawn with this attack party anymore. So basically you can only join the attack party when it is being assembled. I think it would be good to introduce for the first time in the game series revives, so that basically instead of just being killed, you can get downed and then the teammate from your squad can still pick you up. I think it is a good idea for really emphasizing this team play and fighting together as a squad, as an attack team. Then basically the enemy would see the holographic map of the battlefield, and whenever somebody pings an enemy, their attack team gets pinged on the map as well. So basically all the enemies at this point get the information that, well, an attack party heading this direction was spotted. So then if they have the opportunity and enough battle points to assemble a team, they can also assemble a team and choose as their objective to defend a certain objective which is being attacked. I think this system is a really good solution for making players stick together, make players cooperate in a natural way without like any communication actually needed. It allows the developers to make much bigger map with huge number of simultaneous objectives. Some of them might be directly tied to the win conditions. Some of the objectives might be like purely strategic, and it allows the devs to make the map bigger without risking players spreading across the entire map too thin and making the combat too distilled, and players would naturally either spawn at the default spawn point at the high intensity area somewhere in the center of the map where most of the random combat is going on when you don't have the battle points and you just want to earn the battle points and you're waiting for joining an attack team or something like that. And then all the rest of the action on the map is going to come from these different squads of different size that are also focusing players around a specific area. So even though the map would be bigger, you would never have the situation where there are only a few players here and a few players there and there is not enough action going on. Another benefit of the system is that it allows the more skilled players who have more battle points to not only select a stronger character and have more impact on the team's progression within the match, but also take the role of an actual commander who is making decisions for a squad and making a decision to which objective to take right now and where to focus your efforts and how big of a team do you want to take there, and maybe even decisions about what type of attack squad are you trying to assemble, because maybe there are different types of squad and you're assembling like a sniper squad and only people who are playing as a sniper character could join in. So this system really allows better players to have more impact on the progression of the team and contribute more to the team rather than just their individual efforts, and really get into the position of a commander of a unit or like of a squad and be in charge of the cooperation of the team. It naturally forces players to work together, which is, I think, going to be huge for the experience of really being in this battle together with other people, working together for the common cause, fighting shoulder by shoulder with your brothers for a common cause and for the victory. Another benefit of the system is that it doesn't really force a casual player to engage with it. If you are a casual player who doesn't care about the strategy, doesn't care about which objective is the most reasonable target to be taken right now, and who just wants to go there, shoot some droids, be done with it, and then go sleep after a long day at work, nothing really changes for you. And then if you feel like it, you just see a pop-up that you can join a squad. And then still you don't have to be in command, you don't have to assemble your own team. You can just join someone else's squad and you will just get an objective, and the game will naturally reinforce you to stick with these people and try to take this objective together or try to defend this objective together. So you don't really have to be any good at the game to engage with the system and have fun with it, and it will naturally just reinforce the feeling of unity and brotherhood. And I think it is a great thing to have, and from everything I learned about game design over the years is the best games are the ones that are easy to get into, but then also if you really want them to be, they can be deep. And I think this idea is the perfect example of the combination of a casual play style meeting a more hardcore gamer who are more focused on being smart about their choices and really outplaying the enemies, not just by your aim or your skill in terms of agility, but also outsmarting the enemy with your strategy. You could also make it so if you as the team leader select a certain character, then all the members of your attack squad can also join as the same type of character without any extra cost or without paying any extra battle points for it. So for example, maybe you can select a Republic Commando leader character, and then you can only make an attack squad of 3 other people, so 4 people altogether, but then all the players who join your attack squad automatically spawn as Republic Commandos, so that you have like a lore accurate Republic Commando squad. Because I think it really adds to this fantasy of this being an actual unit on a battlefield, and it's a little bit less immersive when you have 2 normal droids, 1 super battle droid and 1 commander droid in a squad supposedly running all together to the same objective. So, of course, to make this entire idea work, the map design and the level design should definitely accommodate for this idea. So, how the map should be structured, in my opinion, is that in the center of the map, you should have the basic combat area where the default spawns are located. And this is going to be basically the incubator where you just go to do some kills, earn some points, and then spend those points on basically making a strategic move on the enemy. And I guess it's important that it will need to accommodate for all the different play styles. So if you play as a sniper or as a close quarter specialist, it should still have some areas viable for these different play styles. And then I guess closer to the edges of the map, you would have certain objectives that are directly linked to the win conditions, and those can be more complex, in-depth type of objectives or missions, kind of like, for example, you had the mission of destroying the capital ship in the Supremacy game mode, where you have to first open the doors and then rush inside and then break your way through the defenders' lines to get to the reactor and then blast the reactor with gunfire. So these like win condition objectives could be basically scenarios like that, just spread across different areas of the map. So maybe like there are multiple of them and you have this objective of destroying this capital ship over there, or destroying this droid factory over here, or sabotaging something. It can be also missions from classical Battlefront 1 from 2015, where you had to, for example, infiltrate a certain area, download certain data, and then escort the data container, like the CD drive, from the point where you extracted it to your home base or something like that. The point is, there should be a plenty of those. You should be free to choose which one you want to focus on. They should be located somewhere closer to the edges of the map. And I think to make the matches not infinite and still have like a clear limited amount of time that you spend on one match, you could just have a timer, and basically the team who accomplished more of these strategic win conditions by the end of the timer wins. Another important point about those strategic win condition based objectives is that those should have some mechanism of stopping players from rapidly proceeding to the final part of the objective. So maybe like it has multiple stages, and after each stage like the doors slowly open up to open you like access to the next area and next stage of defense. So basically to let the enemy team have enough time to react to the attacking team. And then, in addition, between basically the center of the map and the edges of the map, you would have different types of objectives that are helpful to take, but are not directly linked into the win condition. So these are the objectives that I already mentioned before, basically just the things that provide some very specific situational strategic advantage by allowing you, for example, to order airstrike, or blocking a certain area of the map from enemies spawning their gunships there, or letting you into like a catacombs, for example, narrow corridors area that would lead you secretly to some other important location, letting you infiltrate behind enemy lines without being spotted. Okay, so now we kind of covered the main big gameplay loop, a more local gameplay loop within a match. So now it's really the time to speak about the point-to-point gameplay. I think I already mentioned that it would be nice to get rid of the limitations of the class system. However, it surely does provide the opportunities for new players to try out different playstyles in an easy way, because for a new player, having the entire freedom of choice can be really overwhelming. So what I'm suggesting is that when you first boot the game, you have 4 presets, and each preset is basically the same as 4 basic classes in the original Battlefront 2 game, but the difference is you can customize your presets in any way possible. So while you do have those presets available for you by default and acting as different available roles that you can play as, you can customize those any way you want to your liking. So that way you still have complete freedom of mixing any weapons with any abilities in any combination you want, and you still have the option to switch between the different presets fast if you want to switch roles, and have different builds for different playstyles that you enjoy yourself. And I think it keeps the best elements of the original class system and all of the benefits that it provides, at the same time not making it limiting and rigid and restricting. Another more low-level change that I would add to the game is to introduce more mechanics that would encourage emergent camaraderie. So I think it's another moment to take inspiration from Helldivers 2. and basically implement mechanics that require multiple players to cooperate together to achieve something. For example, a vehicle that can only be controlled by multiple people simultaneously. Weapons that require multiple people to operate it, like a rocket launcher in Helldivers that one is holding and another one is reloading. Then you can also have mechanics that don't necessarily benefit yourself in any way, but are great for the team play and really help the rest of the team. So for example, there can be a shield ability, like an actual solid metal shield like you saw in some of the Clone Wars episodes. So you can still go out there and basically block all of the blaster fire for your team while they're reviving. And I think another aspect of the same idea is that you can also encourage players to sacrifice themselves in a cool way, which might sound weird and harsh, but I think it is a big part of this being on a battlefield with your brothers in arms fantasy. All the best moments I can think of in Star Wars are somewhat connected to sacrifice. Think of Andor, think of the clones in Clone Wars that laid their lives for something bigger than they are. It always gives you goosebumps when you see those moments. And I think if you're making a Star Wars game about being on a Star Wars battlefield, it is important to let players feel like they are the heroes from those movies. So make sure that the mechanics that you have and the abilities that you have provide those opportunities for emotional sacrifices. Yeah, honestly, I would really like to just sit here for a couple more hours just brainstorming different cool ideas, but I think all of those are details that are initially up to developers to decide what they want in their game to implement. I'm just here to suggest the general design direction. As long as you're just prioritizing making a good game for a certain gamer audience rather than satisfying all the fans, and as long as you follow the general line of thought that I'm proposing with making those battles as immersive as possible, and as long as the match itself encourages cooperation within the team and allows more experienced, better players to shine, you're gonna be on a good path. Make sure that the goals that I'm trying to solve are also being solved with your solution, because I think the problems that I identified with Battlefront 2 and its strong parts are definitely there. So however you want to approach this, you will still have to solve the same issues and you will still have to address the same design problems as I did. I really hope somebody who's going to make this game actually watches this video for research purposes and get some inspiration for some of your own creative solutions for it. Again, I'm mentioning that everybody who wants to can completely use all of the ideas and all of the solutions that I come up with in this video completely free of charge. I don't give a shit. I'm never gonna try to hunt you for the ideas that you stole from me. All of these ideas are public domain. Use them for your own good. Have fun with it. I personally think that ideas should be free. Have fun. Take these ideas, develop them forward if you want to. Make something of your own from these ideas, completely redo everything I just said. Write in the comments that I'm dumb and I don't understand game design. Do all of that, have fun, have a good day, thanks for watching, have a good evening everybody, and see you next time.